talked a little bit about some of the components of what a strategic planning system is all about.
And one of the things that we believe that is very important is for us to take a look at the respective environments that we operate in.
So today we're going to learn about personality, the differences of personalities, and about relationships.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the HUD OCIO Learning Session. I'm Melanie Cohen. I want to welcome those of you who are here in person and those of you who are watching on the internet. So today we have a great topic, restoring trust in government. Would you trust you? Now, isn't that a great question? Would you trust you? And of course, at first thinking about it, you'd say, yeah, of course, absolutely. But when we really now are going to start talking about all the different dimensions of trust, it'll be very interesting as we begin to think about it, talk about it, you have some questions about it, and we really begin to address it. So we're really very fortunate this morning to have with us Bill Benner. Now, Bill is the president and principal of WW Consulting, Inc. He does executive coaching, he does leadership development now, and he's also had a very varied career in the public sector, working for several federal public sector organizations, as well as local government. And Bill is an expert on trust, and as I said, we're fortunate to have him. So with that, Bill, take it away.
Thank you very much, Melanie. It's a pleasure to be with you and to be part of this broadcast and with those here in the room. What I'd like to do is just provide a quick sort of overview of what I'd like to cover today, and then we'll get into the specifics with respect to the presentation. All right? One of the things that strikes me is that there's a real deficit of trust in the world today, particularly as it relates to public institutions, to our government, to businesses, and even in our personal relationships. So I'd like to provide some references and articles, information regarding that, and also get a sense from those who are here with us. You know, do you feel the same way? Do you feel that that's something that's been showing up more prevalently in terms of the past few years? Then also, moving into a definition of trust, sort of a working definition of trust. We all have different definitions of what we mean when we hear the word, but I want to offer one for the audience with respect to that. And then, what is it really? What is trust really? Then we maybe can open it up for some questions at that point, if that would be helpful. And then from there, I would like to move into explaining a model and framework of trust and what the dimensions of trust are. That when you have that model and you have that language and framework, it's very helpful to ensure that you're having effective conversations with others. From there, and again, it depends on our timing and how much time we have for all this, but what does it take to restore trust once trust has been broken? Not only when you've been untrustworthy, when you know yourself that you maybe haven't met commitments or deadlines, but also when you believe or know that someone else has been untrustworthy. What are the behaviors that can help to restore trust in both those types of circumstances? Then talking about a little bit about characteristics of trustworthy teams, because so much of the work that we accomplish is in a team context. And then an idea that I'd like to float with respect to developing an internal trust index for organizations or organizational units, and then a final analysis and wrap up and questions. So that's sort of the plan for this morning.
Great.
Okay. If we turn to, let's see, it's coming up.
So the first slide?
Oh yeah, the first slide. Is that like showing?
Go ahead and just
go
ahead and we'll just get to it.
All
We'll
right.
show it.
Okay, let me see. Let's see. We should have the slide. It said headlines about trust, declining levels of employee trust. Is that the first one that's up? Can you see?
They see you, but just go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, what I'd like to do is, with respect to this presentation, is to talk about some of the data, some of the analysis that's actually been presented in the press and media and so forth. Watson White did a study actually all the way back in July of 2002, talking about declining levels of employee trust as a major threat to corporate competitiveness. Also, there's a study by the Russell Investment Group which found that the 100 best companies to work for in America, in which trust represented 60% of the overall criteria, earned over 4 times the returns of the market at large over a 7-year period. what happens a lot of times with trust, people talk about it, it's a gut feeling. People say, yes, we know it's important intuitively, but at the same time, they don't have the quantitative data to say, yes, in fact, this is making a difference. And these particular studies are actually showing that that's what's happening. Mercer Company, What's Working survey showed declining employee loyalty worldwide. A lot of that is attributable to the issues of trust. Americans are fed up with politics, not government. One study says, this is from Government Executive magazine, which was in September of 2012, and so forth going through. And you can see, I won't try to go through all the different references here, but Reuters and MarketWatch talks about trust in business is essential from global experts who join forces to combat the trust crisis. Now, as it relates to other survey sources, there's an Edelman Trust Barometer that I think is a very good source for people to be aware of and to take a look at. And it talks about the crisis in leadership. And there's also an effort underway by former chairman of the Fed, Paul Volcker, to ensure that we have responsive government. And it's called the Volcker Alliance. It's relatively new. I think it started up maybe about 3 or 4 months ago, maybe a little bit longer. And they are working to identify ways in which programs, policies, and so forth can be addressed in a more trustworthy manner for the government at large to improve the levels of trust that people have towards their government. There's also, if you just do a simple Google search, you'll find a lot of information, political news stories around trust. And in that regard, as recently as July, there was reference to 70% of Americans believe the federal government is using the data it collects for purposes other than fighting terrorism. Not to get into a political issue, and not striving to do that at all, but it just points out how trust is something that shows up in a variety of ways with respect to what we're hearing and what we're able to accomplish going forward. Trust in the federal government to do what is right, there's concern around that. As stated in USA Today Bipartisan Policy Center review. Another, as recently as June of this year, 24% trust federal government to do the right thing most or all of the time. Only 24%. That's not a very high percentage, obviously. So the pattern continues. So when you think about this topic, it's like our institutions, government institutions, business institutions, even our personal lives, we're under a lot of pressure to evolve. And it's clear that we need collective action in order to improve levels of trust that we want within our citizenship and in our society in general. My personal point of view, Melanie, is that it's really important that each of us practice the behaviors that support trustworthy behavior. If we don't do it individually, it's probably not going to happen collectively, whether it's in small teams, groups, or agencies, or the government as a whole, or business as a whole. And I think this is part of what's been missing along the way. We all, I think, basically recognize the importance and value of trust in our relationships with one another. At the same time, we tend sometimes to move away from those behaviors, or even challenging ourselves about the behaviors that allow us to be trustworthy with others and for us to trust others. So we'll get into in a few minutes some of those behaviors that we can practice, especially when we want to restore trust, okay? Let's see, I'm not sure where we are on the slides at this point, Can you tell? But I'd like to talk about a definition of trust, and each of us has our own, okay, very good. Each of us, I think, has our own definition of trust. If you were to ask a whole room full of people, what does trust mean to you, you're going to get different definitions, I think, along the way. What I'd like to offer is that authentic trust is a decision to coordinate action with another person based on available evidence and a willingness to risk betrayal of that trust. One of the unique aspects about trust is that probably at some point along the way, some element of that may be betrayed by another person. And when I say betrayed, I don't mean an ultimate kind of betrayal, but I mean in terms of just working relationships. So if you're working with someone and you know that they've made a commitment to you for a particular project that you're working on together, and yet they don't meet their deadline or their commitment, or they don't renegotiate it if they have other priorities that come along the way, then, and if that's a continuous pattern, then you're going to find that you're going to start to question whether you can trust their reliability. And we'll talk a little bit later about what those dimensions of trust are for the framework, but essentially it's about coordinating action with another person and a willingness to risk betrayal of that trust if something happens along the way, all right? In other words, to receive trust, many times you have to extend trust. And you don't want to extend trust in a completely blind manner, right? You do it with some degree of judgment, some degree of past experience and knowledge of the person, of their competence, of their ability to get the job done, and so forth. But you have to be able to extend trust many times to receive it. Okay? If you don't extend it, then people are going to question your intentions more often than not. Julio Olaya, who's the founder of Newfield Network and is really an excellent presenter on this particular topic, as well as, he says, trust is the essential precondition upon which all real success depends. So for me, and consistent with Julio's statement here, it's the foundational piece. When you look at different organizational models and team trust models, you'll find that trust is, in many of those, is the foundational component from which everything else follows. Accountability, collaboration, all of those things. He talks about, without it, sustainable change cannot be built or maintained, yet increasingly we find ourselves in a world where our methods to address distrust are insufficient. So what I would like to sort of question, just a general question, is when you find yourself in a situation of distrust or you think that somebody has been untrustworthy, what do you typically do? Do you confront the individual? Do you hold that information within yourself in hopes that maybe things will improve over time and that the person's behavior may change? I mean, so what are the actions that we take? What are the behaviors that we practice that get at the fact that we have a concern? And the fact that it's more than just this gut level of distrust that you may be feeling, but that there are actually elements of trust, like I mentioned, referenced earlier, of reliability and competence, right? You can actually have conversations with individuals around trust-related issues if you have a common language and framework from which to have that conversation. And if you know that these are the distinctions of trust, you may completely feel the person is trustworthy on their competence. They know their business, they know their work, they know they have the skills and the abilities to do everything that they say they're going to do, all right? But their reliability may be in question. So rather than distrusting the whole person, maybe what you distrust about that individual is their reliability. And if that's the case, then you can actually have, it's not easy, but you can actually have a conversation with the person about that, right? And you can, it's about opening up those conversations and making sure that people are aware that this is a concern with you or for you.
You know, that's really interesting, Bill. And I'm just wondering, you know, I think we've all had situations where we actually trusted somebody and somehow we feel betrayed in some way, right? And so what do we do when that happens? I mean, you know, you can close down, you can view this person in sort of a cynical way, you can keep them at arm's distance. There's a lot of different things you can do. I find it interesting, though, that somehow you can compartmentalize. I trust them in this way, but I don't trust them in that way. So is that actually part of the framework that you have?
That is part of the framework that we'll be going into in just a few minutes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Because I think that's something maybe a lot of people would be interested in, because you know, you don't want to necessarily sort of push people away and write them off because of one infraction. Although it's hard to come back when you distrust somebody. But if there's a way to compartmentalize that, that would be really interesting to know.
Well, and that's exactly what the model allows for, what it does.
Great.
I mean, in fact, just the word trust itself sometimes sets people off in a different direction or causes them to shut down. They don't like to use the word trust many times. So by having these different dimensions or distinctions of trust, you can actually talk about not trust per se, but about reliability, competence, sincerity, those types of things. and that way it sort of removes that stigma
Okay.
of trust.
Great.
So I'd like to get a sense maybe from the folks that we have here in the audience. Do you agree that there is a deficit of distrust, or a deficit of trust in our world today, and particularly in our governmental institutions, business, even in our personal relationships with one another? And do you think that that's been escalating? Do you think that that's been increasing over the past, say, 3, 4, 5 years? Because everything I'm seeing in the literature sort of is suggesting that, but I'd like to hear if anyone would like to offer.
I see a little head nodding, and maybe there's some head nodding going on the other side in the internet too, but I also see a question.
Well, not so much a question, but a comment.
Okay.
That I absolutely do think that the distrust is escalating. I think we see that in the polarization of the political, and of course we are heavily influenced as federal employees and federal agencies, heavily influenced by all of that. So yeah, I think it's a huge challenge. And I think within agencies, it becomes a challenge also. I do have a question. I was going to actually save it to the end, but I might as well ask it now.
Sure.
When we talk about distrust, I'm curious about the influence of an organizational environment on these trust relationships. So, maybe outside of an organization, two individuals that work together have a very trusting relationship. They get within the organizational environment, and to a certain extent that may unravel at times. I'm curious, maybe that's something that'll be addressed by the framework that you were pointing out earlier.
It's an excellent question, and when we talk about organizational culture and the types of things that actually come to play, there's so many dynamics, and the myriad of elements here that the example you provided, two people who maybe worked outside the organization very effectively, but they come in and things happen and they're not. They're responding to, each person is responding to different dynamics, organizational dynamics. It might be their supervisor, maybe their supervisors don't see eye to eye, right? Or maybe they have the same supervisor, but they're treated differently. Maybe they feel one's treated with more respect than the other. I mean, there are a variety of things that can happen with respect to that, as you well know. So the key, though, from my perspective, is that if you can sort of strip away organization to a certain degree and just look at your personal behavior, what are you personally doing and interacting with that person or with your supervisor or with whomever the leadership team is, all right, to demonstrate your own trustworthy behaviors. If you do that consistently, I believe, day in and day out, and you really practice that and you challenge yourself, and you ask yourself the question, would you trust you? That's gonna show up. That's gonna show up over time. And in fact, for some people, it may show up immediately because this is not something that they typically would think about, right? They're responding to all these other requests or demands or offers or what have you that come to them, and they're trying to do their job as effectively as they can, and they're trying to be responsive, all right? And they want to do the best they possibly can. In doing the best you possibly can with your work product, there's a process you go through that you can go through by asking these questions about your behaviors, your trustworthy behaviors. So even if another party doesn't reciprocate and respond in a positive way, you know that you personally have practiced those behaviors, which are of benefit ultimately for the organization overall. So hopefully that helps. Okay.
Okay, we have one more question.
I have a comment
A comment.
and just a statement. I agree with what you're saying, that there's an issue about trust. And to define it in a broad sense, I've come to, as I understand it, is that in the animal kingdom, everyone is eating each other. The big ones eat the little ones, and they're just eating each other.
Right,
but in the human kingdom, it seems as if everyone is trying to cheat each other. You don't want to deal with the other person unless they have something to offer, and then you're trying to cheat them out of it if you can. Now, the part about trust that has affected me, and that's why I came here to hear this today, was that I've also, as you were talking about how you departmentalize certain issues, I've classified people into two separate categories. their social friends, and their financial friends. So you can have a conversation with a social friend and have a nice time, but you never give a social friend any money, because then this betrayal is going to come because they're not going to give you your money back. Whereas with a financial friend, you can give them money, have a conversation with them, and they're more responsible, and you can trust them to give you your money back. But you never give a social friend money because they might not give it back to you.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. And you see, that also points out the fact that as we see the world in our own particular way, right? And with our own perspective.
That's absolutely it, through our own lens, through our own experiences, our own lens, our own context. And so if anybody here were to get up and talk about trust and their personal definition of trust, I think we'd have completely different definitions. That's why it's such an interesting topic. And the question of, would you trust you? I mean, has anybody really asked themselves that here? Probably no, because that's not a question that would come up, right? Until it's put forward to you and you really are sort of forced to think about it, which we're doing here.
And you might trust yourself in certain situations, but not in other situations, right?
Right.
But it's about how honest are we with one another, with ourselves, and with one another in that context.
Right.
I have also, which is for fun, actually, Melanie. It's a little self-assessment of trust.
Oh, perfect.
To give you just a couple examples of what some of those statements are that you would score yourself, say, on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is never, 5 is always. It would be things like acknowledge areas of insufficient competence. In other words, if you're assigned to a task or a project and you have a general skill or information knowledge about what needs to be done, but you probably need more, it's about acknowledging you need more. But many people are fearful to say that I need more training to do this job effectively. Because it's almost, you come away with assumptions that, well, if I say that I need more training, it's going to be viewed as though I don't, I can't carry this out ultimately, right? And I should. That should word, there are a couple words that I think are part of our English vocabulary. We'll never get rid of them. But the word, two that I think that probably we could do away with are should and but. And the should is, well, you should have done this. I should have done that, right? Well, you didn't. So, why hold that over yourself? Just next time, make sure you've been able to deliver accordingly, right? And then, how many times have you been in a meeting or in a conversation when somebody says, say it's a team meeting, and someone says, the team leader's talking and says, we did a great job on this part of the project, but we could have done much better on components X, Y, and Z, right? Well, everything that was said in the first part of the statement is negated. Right. So if you simply exchange the word but with and, we did a great job on this project, and we can make some improvements. There are little subtle things like that do make a difference in terms of how we interact with one another and how we establish and build rapport and communication and ultimately trust. So, and they're so subtle sometimes we don't even think about them, So
that one in particular I think is great, because I know I've been in many circumstances where you did a great job, but, and then all of a sudden I forgot what they said in the beginning, because I'm now focused on what I did wrong. And so that happens to everybody, and it sort of gives you that sense that, maybe I didn't do so good. I can always do better. Right. And then you it's not a great feeling. But you're right, if you change it, I still walk away thinking I did good, and you know what? I'm now more motivated to do better on that next thing.
Well, there's always opportunity for improvement
right.
in whatever we do, I think, personally. Right. And so if we recognize that we can do better next time out, so be it, right?
Right.
Yeah. Other things you can ask yourself from a sort of a self-trust perspective is apologize for letting another coworker down. If you don't meet a commitment or deadline or whatever it is you promised to do, how often do people apologize? Many times they don't, right? Ask for help if you don't have the answer. I mean, these are just some examples of the types of things that can be done from a self-trust perspective. Let's see, how are we doing, Melanie, our time?
We're doing great.
We're doing good? Okay.
Yeah.
What I'd like to, I think, maybe move into at this point would be a discussion around the framework and dimensions of trust.
Okay, perfect.
So one of the models of trust that I work with, and there are a variety of models, obviously, but dimensions of trust, we talked a little bit about reliability, we talked a little bit about competence. I see dimensions of trust as, first, there are assessments that we make. Assessments around care, sincerity, competence, and reliability. Okay? There's also how attentive are we to trust, to ensuring that we're maintaining strong trust within our teams and within our organizational units. Then there are actions that help to build, maintain, and restore trust once it's been broken. And then organization and cultural trust, which was referenced earlier as well, has an impact. So when you think about all those different components, care, at least under this model, is our belief that others have our best interest in mind as well as their own when they make decisions or take actions. So we care about one another. We care about the outcome. We're not looking at it from just a personal vested interest perspective or the person making decision on their own, for their own personal interest. So there are behaviors that demonstrate our care. Okay? Sincerity. Sincerity is our belief that others do not intend to deceive us. And that can build up over time where you feel like you can't really trust another person because they're not telling you the truth. They're not giving you the full information. They're not sharing what they know with you, all right? Competence is our belief that others have the ability to do what they promise. So whether it's skills, training, so forth, experience. And then reliability is the fourth element of these assessments, and that's based on the experience that others have fulfilled their promises consistently over time. So as you think about the people that you work with, you know, how do these play out for you? In fact, an interesting sort of exercise is, if with your immediate team, is to take these assessments and these dimensions of trust and score your coworkers. However you want, whether it's 1 to 5, 1 to 10, whatever scale you want to use, in terms of how strongly do you feel they care, how sincere do you feel that they are, how competent do you see their abilities, and how reliable are they, all right? And test that, and test yourself. First of all, test yourself, right, to see how those play out. Attentiveness to trust, which is another component of this framework or model, deals with our readiness to engage in and provide the opportunity for conversations whenever we have distrust that's showing up. And that also benefits the relationship, because you're being attentive to. You may feel that trust is in a very strong suit, but if you don't provide attention to it over time, it can diminish. So it's about being attentive to it. It's almost like preventive maintenance in a way, like for healthcare, right? Making sure you're doing preventative things to ensure that your health stays strong. The same thing in attending to, being attentive to trust. And then there are actions related to building trust, maintaining and restoring it. And then for organizational or cultural trust, one of the questions I would ask you all to consider, what is the prevailing mood of your organizational unit or of your immediate team? And there are some basic moods that exist. A variety of moods, obviously, but there are 4 in particular that I like to work with. 2 are on the negative side of the ledger and 2 are on the positive side. The 2 on the negative side are resentment and resignation. How many people do you know that carry out their jobs day in and day out, but they sort of live in a mood of resentment? You know, somebody else did something to them and they're never going to forget about it, right? And it's the other person's fault. Or it's a mood of resignation, where no matter what I do, it's not going to make any difference. No matter how often I speak up, offer suggestions and ideas, it's not going to hear the light of day, right? The opposite of resentment and resignation on the positive side of the ledger, opposite of resentment, is peace or acceptance. There are a lot of things in life we cannot control, but there are a lot of things we can control. And one of the things we can control, if we believe it, is that we can control our mood and we can control how we see the world around us and what we're doing day in and day out in our work environments. So, where would one prefer to be? In a mood of peace and acceptance with that which is, or in a mood of resentment? And then the opposite of resignation is actually like ambition or contribution, knowing that you make a difference. And I think where people, when people talk about employee engagement in organizations, they want to be on that right side of that ledger, because that's where employee engagement is going to actually kick in, not on the left side. And as leaders, as supervisors, as managers, and as officials of various agencies, there is such an important role that each person plays in creating that culture, that organizational culture, where it's a mood of, yes, we can do this, yes, we're going to go about accomplishing this task, as Herculean as it may be, and we are going to accept that which we cannot change, but also look at ways in which we can make improvements. So that's part of this process too. So I don't know what if we did a survey to find out what the prevailing mood of most agencies is today, I can sort of guess a little bit at what it might be, but it's going to run the gamut too, right? Some agencies much higher than others. And that shows up also in the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey data as well.
Before you jump into the next topic, one of the things that's coming to my mind as you're talking really is about people being very self-aware, self-reflective, understanding their own motivations. And you know what? It seems like a lot of times people really don't do that, do they? And that's a big piece of the trust factor, because if you're not aware of how you are as an individual, it's hard to really even know how you come across to other people, right? So is there something here about how, or do you want to talk about how we can sort of take the time to be a little bit more self-reflective? Because that seems to be a key piece of it.
I think what happens in probably in most federal agencies, most places of employment, okay, people are so pressed with the day-to-day that they don't take the time out, even if it's just for 5 minutes, which is something that we can all do, I think, to reflect on like I talked earlier, about their own behaviors. What are their behaviors? How are they being perceived by others? You may not know completely for sure. I mean, people are going to have different opinions about what you've said, what you've done, how you've reacted, your body language, all of those things, right? And of course, body language is supposedly 80% of communication. That's what people pick up on, okay? Not what's actually stated. But it is important to be self-reflective, and I think that's why coaching has become more prevalent in many agencies today, in organizations in general, because it's about getting into yourself a little bit more than we do typically, and asking these relevant questions that we're talking about.
Okay, great. We have an audience question.
Just a question on the dimensions of trust in the assessments before you leave this.
Yes.
It seems that there are probably, I can think of at least one that may be a little more difficult to recover from than some of the others, and I'm taking a look at sincerity as an example versus competence, where the relationship starts. If you're questioning the competence of somebody can get smarter about that subject. But it seems that once you have identified somebody as being insincere, that would be very challenging to recover from. And I'm just wondering about your thoughts on that.
It's very, very true. Because if you know that individual, or you feel that individual is not, being sincere in what they're telling you or saying, what happens typically is people will then they'll shy away, they'll stay away from that person, or they won't have communications with that individual. It's interesting because there are studies that have shown that people who express sincerity, but then if it's sort of a mixed bag with somebody you're working with, on occasions you feel like they're sincere, and other occasions you feel that they're not sincere, you trust them even less than if they're completely insincere with you. Because you don't know where they're coming from. You don't know what they're really about or what they're going to potentially do in a given situation, right? And yes, it is extremely difficult. And I wish I had, you know, the magic bullet
You don't have the answer to that? You don't
I'm still
have the
working. I'm
answer?
still working on the magic
Okay.
bullet for that one. I do have some things around restoring trust that do relate to sincerity and so forth. But yeah, it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, admittedly. But I do think that if you feel someone is insincere with you, that's a continuous pattern, then you're just going to probably shut that person down or shut them out, right? And they're going to see that. They're going to be aware of that. And if they don't really care, this goes back to the other component of care, then maybe they don't care. That's going to even add further salt to the wound, basically, right? Because it's like they don't value you. Or that's the impression you can come away with. And no one wants to feel that way. But that's part of the self-reflective part you were talking about a moment ago, Melanie, why it's so important for all of us to be aware of that,
Right.
how we're coming across with others. And I'm not necessarily a huge proponent of 360 feedback, although I think it has its place. I think that if it's used in the proper way for development and for personal self-awareness, I think that's fine. It's when organizations tend to use it for performance, reviews and for a variety of other things, compensation, that I think sometimes if it's not presented in the proper manner and has to be used, and there's conditions of satisfaction around it in terms of why are we doing this and for what purpose and benefit, then I think it can get wrapped up into lots of things that cause distrust. So, yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, what I'd like to, I guess, address now is some of the components or some of the elements about things that you can do when you've been untrustworthy. If you've been untrustworthy with another individual or with the team, okay? And I won't read through all of these, but I do want to reference just a few. One would be apologizing for your mistakes now, not later. The longer you wait to apologize if you've made a mistake and you know you've made a mistake, right? The worse it gets. There are different stories in the news, and I won't go into the specific stories, but if we say as an agency or as a government or as a business that we're gonna find out information about what transpired and something, maybe it's a tragedy of some sort, then we need to be able to get that information out to the public, out to people, so that they know where things stand, where we are, right? Another would be honoring and following through on your remaining commitments. So maybe you've missed a commitment, but there are other commitments you made. Well, just the fact that you missed the first one doesn't mean you have to miss the others. In fact, better that you're not. So make sure you follow through and honor those commitments. And if necessary, renegotiate your promises with others when you have to. If you have other priorities, higher priorities that intervene that maybe the other person is not aware of, then that's important.
How about not overpromising? I see that happen a lot. I see a lot of overpromising, promising that you're going to come through with something when you sort of in the back of your mind know maybe you really can't do it.
Well, there's this tendency to want to please, right?
Right.
And you don't want to tell your boss that you can't get it done, right?
Right.
And your boss may be aware, may not be aware of all the things you have on your plate that you need to do, right?
Right.
But there is something about saying no. You can provide a qualified no. No, I can't do it right now, or I can't do it in the context of these other 4 or 5 major projects that are underway that we've all agreed we're going to work on together, right? But I can do it once those are completed, or I can start one element of this, right? So it's not like a flat out no, I can't do it, no, I won't do it. It's a qualified no in saying that not at this time, not right now. But how often do we do that? I mean,
Just shake your head. I mean, how often do you really say, no, I can't meet that? Does anybody really say that? No. You say, yeah, I'll do it, but you sort of know, wow, I probably shouldn't have said that.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
then,
what most people do.
and then what happens is that there's this expectation then,
Right.
if you say yes, I'm going to do X, whatever it is, there's the expectation by the other party that you're going to follow through and do it.
Right.
And yet you're putting potentially more stress and more difficulty on yourself to be able to get all the things done that you have to do. So it's about the honesty of the conversation, the openness and the transparency of the conversation, and the courage to speak up. And what I see so often, it doesn't matter whether it's government, business, nonprofit, any type of organization, and even in personal relationships, is people can't muster the courage at times to speak up in a respectful way, not being negative or being, resentful or anything of that sort, but to talk about what can we accomplish together. When you set about any kind of project or any kind of a task, do you set conditions of satisfaction for that project or task? And by conditions of satisfaction, what I mean is, not only what is the final product going to basically look like, not all the details, but generally this is what we're going to accomplish, but how are we going to go about accomplishing it? If you're in a meeting and you don't have any ground rules for your meetings, and somebody speaks up and offers an idea, we were talking about this earlier, Melanie, they offer an idea and it immediately gets shut down by the team leader or maybe by another team member, maybe even to the point of someone saying, oh, we tried that last year, it didn't work, and they dismiss it, right? What do you think that person is going to do the next time around they have an idea? You think they're going to bring it to the table? Probably not, right? So that's another way in which you can sort of engender trust on a team and trust with one another, is listening, effective listening. Listening to understand where the person's coming from. These are all pieces or elements of what helps generate strong trust between individuals and within teams and within an entire agency for that matter.
It's interesting you say that about the ground rules. We were just talking about that yesterday, about establishing ground rules for meetings. So now when we are going to, in the future, when we go into meetings, we're going to have established ground rules. Now they'll either be posters or they'll either be handouts, but it's going to be something very obvious. For instance, you can argue with the idea, but don't argue with the person. And so what ends up happening oftentimes in meetings, people may not get along, right? And so their idea becomes marginalized because you don't like that person. And so now it's really not about anything personal. It's just about the idea. So you can have a really, ferocious argument about an idea and still go out and have lunch afterward. It doesn't matter because it's not individualized and personalized. But that's also a great way to establish trust between people.
It is, most definitely. And I find more often than not there aren't, teams don't have ground rules for their meetings. They take their lead from the team leader. Right. Or maybe there's a very vocal team member who speaks up most of the time. And it's almost like an expectation they're the ones that are going to be offering the ideas, right? But everybody has something to contribute.
Right, that's right.
And when everyone feels that they are in an environment or in a context in which they can do that, then trust will take off.
Okay.
Really will. Let's see. If we look at when you believe or know someone has been untrustworthy, just a couple examples there, things that you personally can think about. Is try and place yourself in the other person's position and ask with the intent to understand why they acted in the manner that they did, right? We don't know exactly what's going on in the minds of everybody around us and that we work with in particular. And so there might be opportunities where we can actually be a little bit more mindful of what their situations are. And when you do look at someone who's been maybe untrustworthy, do you know this for a fact, or is that an assessment? Are you just surmising that based on some available evidence or not? So those are a couple that I think you can look at. And also one other thing I'd like to add to this is this whole notion of, there's a term called cordial hypocrisy. And you think about how a lot of people work with one another, they may, when they're together, be very cordial, like, hi, Melanie, how are you doing today? I hope everything's going well for you, right? And then turn right around later that day and say something about Melanie that is not a positive statement, right? Although, I'm giving the appearance that it's very cordial and we're very friendly and it's very trustworthy. So there's cordial hypocrisy that takes place in organizations and on teams, So from a team standpoint, do teams support one another in public when they're away from their team meetings? when they're away from their daily work? I mean, so these are just some other examples of what we can think about and act upon.
Okay.
So, okay?
Okay, great.
Okay.
We just have a couple more minutes. We have to end a little bit early today. So I'll tell you what, let me see if there's any other questions from the audience, and then maybe you can do a wrap-up, and then
Sure.
we can do that. Are there any questions from the audience? Okay, one more question.
Just one question on, you'd mentioned blind trust. And if one goes into a new relationship and your default position is that, I'm going to trust this person until they give me a reason not to. That's kind of a blind trust, I would think. And what do you see as kind of some of the major pitfalls to having that approach?
Well, typically, you probably won't enter into a completely blind trust. I mean, an infant has blind trust if you can argue with the parent, because they don't know any better, right? But as adults, as human beings, we know that if we have some story about this person that we're interacting with that maybe causes us to question, or maybe we don't have any interaction at all, and we go into it, it's about being willing to extend trust, okay? But also, remember the definition we talked about earlier, to extend trust with the knowledge that that trust could be betrayed. Now, once it's been betrayed, or you feel it's been betrayed, then the question becomes, what do you personally do about addressing that? Now, I've seen situations where people, a direct report to a senior officer was in a town hall meeting, and they were talking about a particular topic on child care and whether or not there would be an on-site child care center. And the person who was responding to the group said, well, we've reviewed that. We're not going to be doing that. We'll have something like, we'll participate in a local consortium, what have you. That person's boss steps in and says, that's not true, in front of all these people, right? So, that's where you might have the blind trust that because you've already had that conversation with your boss, and it's already been agreed as to what you're going to do, but then that position gets reversed, well, then you have your evidence that you cannot provide blind trust or continue to just simply extend trust without then having a conversation about what just happened. And without the conversation, guess what happens? It just gets worse. Because you go quiet, they go quiet, or not, right? And that's where it ends up. And it continues to deteriorate. So.
Okay. So unfortunately, if we're running out of time, unfortunately. So I hate when this happens. But I think that this is really kind of the beginning of the conversation. Okay. I think this is the first part of really our talking about trust. And I've already talked to Bill, in all honesty and trust. I've already talked to Bill about perhaps coming back to talk to us early next year in 2014 to continue the conversation. So I'll tell you what, Bill, if you could just wrap up with like maybe 2 or 3 key points.
Okay.
And then we can be done.
Fantastic.
Okay.
And it's really been a pleasure to be a part of this session today. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you.
A couple just wrap-up points that I'd like to leave with you. Trust, again, in my perspective, is at the heart of the health and survival of an organization and the people within that organization. So if you think about trust and you think about what you're doing each day to make this a stronger, healthier agency, organization, team, you can do it. And it doesn't have to come just from leadership. Leadership sets the tone many times, and people respond to that because it filters down. But my personal belief is that those in middle management and those even not in management at all can actually affect the trust of an organization by their own individual and collective behavior. And I think that's one of the key points that I'd like to leave with you. The absence of trust acts like a corrosive on the well-being of any organization and, of course, the well-being of the people. So if you have a lot of distrust taking place, what kind of mood do you think typically the people are going to be in? Probably resentment, resignation. They're not going to be bringing their creative ideas forward, and they're not going to be collaborating effectively, and they're not going to be getting the best possible outcomes, for their group. So those are some basic tenets. And I think there's also this part about self-reflection that we talked about. It's really important to think about how we trust. What are the conditions under which we typically trust other people? And it's going to vary. We're all different, right? And so I would challenge you to think about that in terms of why do you trust? And who do you really trust? And are there certain people that you can count? Sometimes you can count them on one hand, the ones that you can trust almost anything with, or virtually anything with, right? They may be a best friend, they may be a family member, could be a coworker, or whatever. But somebody that actually can embody that. And it's really about embodiment. It's about what you're doing every day, but how you're coming across in the world that we live in. So those are some summation points I'd like to.
Well, terrific. I think we learned a lot today. I know I did, and I think it gave us a lot to think about. So, Bill, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you all.
And please join us for our next session. It's going to be December 10th, and the topic is going to be multi-sector leadership. We're going to have Dr. A.J. Robinson from the George Washington University talking to us. So thank you and have a wonderful day.